Walking her home. This happened more than 10 years ago. I was a student at a college I won't name for anonymity's sake. I was studying at the library on a late Tuesday night. I was always one of the last ones there. I didn't have much a social life. I didn't party. I didn't belong to any clubs. I just kept to myself and focused on getting the highest GPA that I could. Midnight came and the librarian walked up to the second floor where I was and told me it was time to start packing up. As I was getting my things together, I could have sworn that I heard something from behind one of the bookshelves near me. It sounded like someone was moving, like they were shuffling their feet over the carpet or something. I went to the bookshelf. I looked behind it, figuring there may have been another student there that didn't know it was almost closing time. But there was no one there. A single book had been left on the floor. As I crouched to pick it up, I heard someone moving again. I was certain that I heard someone this time. I looked all around me. I was alone in that bookshelf aisle. I looked in between the books to see if anyone was on the other side. No one. The librarian called me from the first floor. "Lydia, come on, we gotta go." Outside, I scanned my surroundings while the librarian locked the doors to the building. It seemed the entire campus was covered in a thick fog. I couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of me. "Lydia," the librarian asked, "would you like a ride to your apartment? My car's just right there in the lot." I looked toward the little path that led through the campus and led towards the apartment complex I lived in, just off campus. It was shrouded in fog, but there seemed to be enough streetlight to see my way. "I'll be fine," I told her. "I'll just walk fast." I took 10 steps toward the path. I stopped and turned around, just in time to see the librarian disappear into the fog. I felt like I had no choice now. I had to walk home alone. I walked fast, clutching my book bag to my stomach. I kept looking back and forth and behind me, unable to shake this feeling that I was being watched. I made it to the edge of campus. There was only one block left to walk to get to my little apartment building I lived in. The block was about 300 feet long. There were 2 street lights along the sidewalk, and that night, both of them were out. The last leg of my journey home was completely dark and buried in fog. If someone was even 10 feet away from me, I couldn't see them. "Just do it," I told myself. I forced one foot after the other, walking into the darkness. I made it about 50 feet down the block when I heard something behind me. It sounded like feet shuffling along the pavement. I stopped dead in my tracks. I turned around. I squinted and strained to see anything beyond the fog, but I couldn't see anyone there. I turned and started going faster. I made it another 20 steps when I thought I heard another pair of feet moving along the pavement behind me. I stopped and turned around, breathing fast and ragged. "Hello?" I called out. No one answered. I felt my heart creep into my throat. I slowly started to walk backwards. Maybe there's no one there, I thought. I'm alone. I'm just scaring myself. I took a deep breath. I turned and started walking again, but only after a few steps, I heard someone else walking behind me, and this time, they seemed closer. I turned around. I faced that sickening darkness and fog once more. "I know you're there," I hollered into the darkness. I couldn't think of anything else, so I started lying. "I have a gun, just so you know." I stood still. I waited. I squinted. I could barely see something through the darkness. Was it the shape of a person? Was it my imagination? I wasn't sure, but for nearly a half a minute, it didn't move. I took one step backwards. The shape suddenly moved. It was a person. They bolted into a full sprint down the sidewalk towards me. I turned. I dropped my book bag. I ran as fast as I could. I didn't think anything else except getting to my apartment building at the end of the block. I finally made it. I was out of breath. My legs and arms were burning. I dashed up the stoop, punched in the code, got inside the building, and slammed the door behind me. I stayed there for a moment. I looked through the glass window in the front door, waiting to see if whoever was following me would emerge out of the fog, but no one did. "My bag," I whispered. Instinctively, I went to open the door, knowing that my book bag was still out there on the sidewalk, but I froze before I could open the door. My bag wasn't worth it if it meant going back out there. Whoever was following me, they were just right out there in the darkness. I left my bag behind and went to my apartment. I thought the worst of the night was behind me. I took some sleeping pills to help me relax. After an hour or so, I lay in bed in my apartment. I even started to tell myself that it had all been in my head. Tomorrow, I would find my bag there on the sidewalk and everything would be fine. But as I started to fall asleep, I could have sworn I heard someone knocking on my front door. I tried to stay awake, but the pills were kicking in and I could hardly keep my eyes open. Just as I nodded off, I thought I heard it again. Someone knocking on my door. The next morning, I woke up and stretched in bed. The daylight poured in through the bedroom window. I could hear people outside talking and laughing. I even heard a lawnmower running in the distance. It felt right. It felt safe, waking up just like I did every Wednesday. "My bag," I groaned, remembering it was out there on the sidewalk. I wasn't too worried that anyone had stolen it. Who wanted to steal a bag full of textbooks and notebooks? I got dressed. I went out the front door. I nearly stumbled over something. My book bag. It was there on the breezeway floor. Someone had put it there. I don't even know how long I just stood there in the breezeway, staring at my bag. I could hardly breathe. I finally got the nerve to pick it up. Nothing was taken, but there was something left inside. A little crumpled note. Whoever had brought my bag back, they left a message. "I enjoyed walking you home last night. Next time, answer the door." The elevator ride. I lived in a shabby apartment building on the south side of the city. Every night, I would finish up my shift at the diner and take my half-hour commute home. I was 30 years old, a woman going home alone at night through the city, but I was never afraid. I always kept mace in my purse, and I stayed alert to my surroundings. That night, like every night, I kept an eye out for danger on my way home from the diner. I walked fast down the sidewalks, kept to myself on the subway ride, but the danger wasn't waiting for me on the street. It was waiting for me when I got home. To get to my floor of the apartment building, I usually took the rickety old elevator since I didn't want to climb 6 flights of stairs every night. The elevator hadn't been updated in some time. The walls were all covered in polished metal panels, the kind where you can see your own blurry, distorted reflection in them. The elevator always went slow, and it groaned as it traveled up and down the floors of this old apartment building. When I first moved in, one of the younger tenants told me the infamous ghost story of this building. According to the story, in the 50s, there was a man named Herman Miners who lived in the basement. He would spend his days riding up and down the elevator, never saying anything to anyone, just standing there, staring at them. Since he was the grandson of the building owners, he was never thrown out. He was allowed to stay in the building as everyone's least favorite creep. One day, the super was working in the tenant's bathroom on the first floor. He was near the vents that were directly connected to the basement. While he was fixing the pipes in the bathroom, he started to hear noises coming through that vent. At first, he thought it was an animal growling, but as he paid more attention, he could recognize a man's voice, growling and grunting. Then, he heard a woman scream as the man snarled. The super ran down to the basement. The place was a wreck. Herman's bed had been torn and tossed to the floor. His things were scattered across the basement floor. The super found a woman lying on the floor near the back. She was screaming and clutching at her thigh. It looked like an animal had taken a bite out of her flesh. Blood gushed from her leg while she screamed, "It was Herman! That creep tried to kill me!" The woman lived, and she moved out of the building as fast as she could. They didn't find Herman until a week later. They found him hanging from a water pipe in the basement. He had killed himself and left a note they had to pry from his stiff, dead hand. His note was just a short, strange message. "I'm sorry. I can't help myself." That's not all they found, though. He left one other thing behind. They found it in a metal box, a woman's severed head. Her teeth had been removed, her eyes had been gouged out. It looked like the head had been decomposing for some time. They never identified the woman, and they could never officially prove Herman killed her. But as the story lived on through the years, it was always told that Herman had killed her and perhaps other women they never found. And now, I was standing inside the elevator that Herman allegedly used to ride up and down all day and night, perhaps trying to find his next victim. The other tenants told me stories about strange things happening in that elevator. Some said they could hear him breathing when they rode it. Others say the elevator doors kept shutting when they tried to get out. I didn't believe any of that because I wasn't superstitious, not until after that night. I checked the time on my cell phone while I waited for the elevator to go up. It was near midnight. After about a minute, the doors hadn't shut. "Come on," I said as I pressed the button for my floor several more times. "Come on, work!" Finally, the doors dragged across the tracks with a loud metallic screech. "This building is so freaking old," I muttered. I waited for the elevator to start rising up, but instead, it shook and rattled, and then it began to lower. What the hell? I slammed my finger on the button for my floor over and over, but the elevator kept lowering, and there was only one level it could go to: the basement. My stomach dropped. It felt harder to breathe. My chest felt tight in a sudden panic. All I could do was stand there, trapped in the elevator as it reached the basement. The elevator stopped. The seconds felt like hours as I waited. Then, the door slowly opened with a metal groan. Before me was the basement. The only light came from the elevator, and it only reached about 5 feet from the elevator doors. Everything else beyond was in pitch black darkness. I didn't dare take another step forward. I slammed my finger on the button to shut the doors. "Come on!" But the doors wouldn't shut. Then, from somewhere in that basement, a man's voice called out to me. "What are you still doing in there?" I froze. I wasn't sure if I'd actually heard someone or if it was my imagination, but then he spoke again. "Come on out. It's okay. I want to show you something." There was no way I was stepping even an inch towards that open elevator doorway. I pressed the button over and over until my hands started to cramp. "What's the problem?" the man asked. "Come over here. I want to show you something." I reached into my purse with my other hand. I grabbed the can of mace and pulled it out. The man's voice became rougher and lower. "I said get out of the elevator right now. Come here." Finally, the elevator doors started to shut. They went slow, dragging closed with that horrible metallic scream. "Get over here. I'll kill you. If you don't come out, I'll chop your head off." I was about to burst into tears. I stumbled back and nearly collapsed against the wall of the elevator. The doors were about to close, and just when there was only a little space left between them, a man's hand shot in between them. He was holding a knife and swinging it around violently. "Get out of there, right now! I'll kill you!" The rusted old doors didn't open for him. They kept shutting, even as his hand was in between them. I kept to the side of the elevator where his knife couldn't reach me. He was still screaming as he dropped the knife and pulled his hand back. The door shut and the elevator finally started to rise. I stayed in the corner of that elevator, staring in terror at the knife he left behind. I'll never forget what was etched into the handle. 2 letters. H.M. I called the police as soon as I got to my apartment. I told them someone was in the basement and they had attacked me. I kept the knife in my apartment to show them. I'm certain that I left it on the kitchen counter, but when the police arrived to search the building, the knife was gone. They never found anyone in the basement. They never found anyone hiding anywhere in the building. They told me whoever attacked me was long gone. The very next day, I looked for another place to live. It took another month, but I finally got out of that building. For that last month, I stayed away from the elevator and took the stairs, but I'll never forget that last night I was there. I came home from work like always. The elevator doors were shut when I walked into the building, but before I reached the stairwell at the other end of the hall, the elevator doors opened. I turned around. I could see the elevator at the other end of the hall, and I could see some of the metal wall adjacent to the doors. In the reflection of the wall, I saw someone standing there. It looked like a man, but the reflection was blurry. He just stood there in the corner of the elevator. He didn't move. I immediately turned and climbed down the stairs as fast as I could. But when I reached the floor, I went straight down the hall to my apartment. But as I unlocked the door, the elevator doors at the end of the hall opened. The old rusted elevator was on my floor now. Inside, it seemed empty. I just stood outside my door, staring at the open elevator and shaking. Someone's hand came around the doorway frame. Then I barely saw the side of a man's face as he emerged from the corner of the elevator. He said something to me in a rough, low whisper. "Hey, get back here. I've got something to show you. Come here." I threw open my apartment door. I got inside and slammed it shut. I locked it quick and backed away. I looked through the peephole, expecting to see a man in the hallway, but there was no one there. After a minute, I opened the door and peeked into the hallway. There was no one there. I watched as the elevator doors slowly grinded shut. I called the police and told them the attacker was back. They searched the building again, but they never found anyone. I never returned to that apartment building again, but I've never forgotten what happened to me. I'm still not sure who it was in the elevator, or who it was in the basement. Maybe it really was Herman. I'll never know. All I know is, I'll never ride another elevator alone again.